Hello, this is Alex Julian here. As you know, Aloysius Anderman on DeviantArt. I'm here to talk about a subject that I would like to call the difference between strong men and frail men. Strong men, as you know, are marvelous. You could see this in a lot of fantasy and folklore and tradition of storytelling. Maybe there's a knight in shiny armor. Maybe there is the very productive Santa Claus deliveryman. Maybe there's the elf who knows how to mind his own business during his toy production. Maybe there's the prince who wanders through the woods looking for his lover. There's Superman who has the might of his muscles and his eye laser beam. There's all kinds of examples in fantasy and fiction of the strong man. And generally speaking, a strong man is very necessary for a woman to have a relationship. And as a general rule, as you know, women today in our society really demand for strong men. This has been an interesting phenomenon I've noticed going on in the United States, where to this day, even with modern technology, so many women on dating websites assume that they must marry strong men. But I think recent years in the United States, with our influx of population and culture and society, has shown us that that may be a cliche from the past of the folklore that would talk about, the knight in shining armor fighting a dragon, flaming breath of fire, and those kinds of things. And of like the World War I soldier fighting other enemies in his masculine uniform. But here's the problem. What about frail men? And when I say frail men, I mean weak men. What about weak men? What about the unsung heroes that often you do not run into very much in a lot of folklore, in a lot of fantasy and fiction? What about the man who has to live in a wheelchair? What about the man who has to live with a mental condition? What about the man who has a muscle defect? What about the man who has a lot of bone structure problems? What about the man who has some kind of uncurable illness? What about the man who is in a hopeless state of poverty and is unable to get out of it? I think these are questions that most women in the United States do not consider. Because, you see, women, if I may drink my soda here, women in the United States often want strong men. They do want that knight in shining armor. They want their Superman. They want their Captain Marvel. They want their, Captain Infinite or whatever. But so many women forget to note that there are men who are below strength. There are men below courage. There are men below might. Obviously, if there is a man in a wheelchair, he is going to need to use his arms, probably. And his legs are going to be out of reach. And so his ability will be sideways. And then there's the blind man. The blind man. Well, a blind man can be strong. I'm sure a blind man can lift muscles and, lift heavy weights and those kinds of things. But a blind man does have strength, but it's not with much sight. And he has to use his mind more, and that makes it more difficult for him. Because the world is often based on sight rather than mind. And there's someone like me, for example, who has mental disorders, who has mental diseases, and who has autism, and who has schizophrenia, and who has bipolar disorder, and who has attention deficit disorder, and who has, mood disorder and psychosis and those kinds of things. There's someone like me with those illnesses. What am I to do? Am I able to be the strong man in a relationship? Ironically enough, when it comes to someone like me, for example, when it comes to a relationship, I am actually going to need a strong woman to take care of our relationship, because I am unable to be a strong man. Because I'm not sure if you have met many people with autism. I'm sure you have in school run into people with autism. You notice that people with autism are usually pretty good at what they do, but they get awkward. They get inconsistent. They get unpredictable. And that causes a lot of confusion in social life. Because as you know, like, normal people are easy to predict. I mean, even for me, it's easier for me to deal with normal people than it is to deal with other people who have autism like I do. And this is where it gets interesting when it comes to the whole mental world of things. Even for a mentally ill person like me, dealing with another mentally ill person is pretty difficult at times. And I'm making this video to go by my therapist's orders to express things to the public about, my personal living. Like, I'm very much instructed to do this. But yeah, with most relationships in the United States, it is expected that men be strong and that women just be graceful. But if I would ever get into a relationship, it is actually the woman who needs to be strong. And for so many women I've dated over the years, that makes it really tricky. So, believe it or not, with so many women I've dated over the years, it gets frustrating for them to know that I am a frail man and that I do need a lot of help from a strong woman, because a lot of women do not think of themselves as really that strong. Women often like to think of themselves as helpful, or as reliant, or as cooperative, or as, romantic, and those kinds of things. Most women are not ready to take the role of, like, Superman. And when they try, it's obvious, and we know that they're trying. And I am the kind of man, like a lot of men. There are men in wheelchairs. There are men with mental illnesses. There are men with physical disabilities. There are men with body issues. There are men with physical conditions who need strong women in their relationships. And at times this does happen in a relationship, but it's more difficult for this kind of relationship to begin and to continue to exist. It is difficult because so many women in the United States do have the expectation that men must be strong. and that women must rely on strong men. There are even liberal women who perceive that that is the reality. They perceive it that it is absolutely the reality that every relationship must have a strong man. A strong man of the household. But the truth is, sometimes there are the kinds of relationships in the United States that do not contain strong men. At times, it is the women who must be strong. And that puts a lot of pressure on the women because could you imagine a woman knight in shining? Could you imagine a woman knight in shining armor? Could you imagine Superwoman? Could you imagine a female warrior? Could you imagine, a female superhero? Could you imagine a female soldier? It is possible for a strong woman to take charge of a relationship, but it is a lot more difficult and demanding because a woman is who she is. She is a woman. And a woman naturally does have her female characteristics. And yet, here I am as a weak, frail man who may need to be in need of a strong woman in any future relationship I may get into. And I hope things will go easier for other men and other women who have this sort of problem as well. I just hope that when it comes to our awareness of strength, that we do not rely so much on strength and we rely more on trust, love, and caring and charm and happiness and those kinds of things. And you take care. God bless.